Welcome to the Gray Area Podcast presented by Mint Mobile. I'm your host, Kevin Gray. Appreciate you joining me here on the latest episode of the Gray Area Podcast. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating, write a review for it while you're there. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, make sure you like and comment on the video as well. Ready for a new NBA season. We're just days away from all 30 NBA teams opening up training camp. The calendar about to turn from September to October, which means it's time for hoops in the association. And joining me today, you can find him on Twitter at ESPN_MacMahon, part of the triumvirate that is the Hoop Collective with Brian Windhorst, although I'm sure he would tell you he's the better third of all three gentlemen. You can also see him covering the Mavericks and the NBA on ESPN. He is Mavericks and NBA insider and reporter. My guy, Tim MacMahon, joining me here on the Gray Area. Tim, what's going on?
Howdy, partner. How you doing?
I'm well. Good to see you. It's about to be hoop time in the association, about to turn the calendar from September to October. Have you had a chance to kind of, chill out a little bit this summer as you get ready for a new season?
We're refreshed and ready to go.
Okay. Well, looking forward to our conversation today. A lot to get into because, of course, for Mavericks fans who watched this team last year make a run to the NBA Finals, Luka Doncic, top 3 in the MVP, 73 points in a game, scoring champion, all the accolades that he earned last year. And now this team adding Klay Thompson. How surprised were you that the Mavericks were able to actually convince Klay to leave a place where he had been for 13 years, winning 4 NBA championships, and now at this stage looking for a second act in his career, that this was the place for him to be able to try and win yet another championship for this team?
Well, I don't think they had to convince him to leave Golden State. I think they had to convince him to choose Dallas. And, he came to the determination that it was time for him to close that chapter. And obviously the last few years, but especially this last year was tough for him in Golden State, felt unwanted. I think he's been very clear about that. So he came to the conclusion, especially as they didn't make him a priority. They were going after Paul George. They had other things that they were prioritizing over Klay. He decided he was no longer going to be part of the Golden State Warriors. And then it became, what's the next destination? And I do think it's somewhat surprising that the Mavericks were able to win a recruiting battle against the Los Angeles Lakers, especially given his roots in that organization. I mean, his dad won championships with the Showtime Lakers and has been part of their radio broadcast for years and years and years. I think he saw the opportunity, as he has said, to contend for a championship, hopefully be, in his mind, the final piece of the Mavericks championship puzzle. And at the same time, it's not the same level of spotlight. It's not as harsh of a spotlight. As great as Luka is, as many eyeballs as there are on Luka and Kyrie, it's a different deal than if you go from one of the most intense fishbowls in the NBA to perhaps the only franchise that's a more intense fishbowl right now, playing next to LeBron with the Lakers. And so I think this is Klay saw this as an opportunity for him to transition into the final chapters of his career where he can still compete for championships, but not feel like he's under a microscope every minute that he steps onto the floor.
Someone asked me the other day, like, how would I describe the Mavericks offseason with the addition of Klay Thompson and to a lesser degree, obviously, with Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes, and then thinking back to, trading for Kyrie Irving and being able to resign him in free agency and him helping this team, get to the NBA Finals. And the word that I came up with was transformative, because it feels like there's been a real transformation in this organization and the perception of them around the league, how they're viewed as a potential destination for guys to go. You've covered this team and seen this team for a long time. How has the perception of the Mavericks changed with Nico Harrison, with Jason Kidd, and how they have been able to really create an environment where guys are looking at it and say, yeah, that's a place where I would actually want to go and be accepted to be the guy that I think I can be there?
Well, and, with Kyrie, who is a big part of the recruiting process, who is a guy who has relationships throughout the league, had been a 2-time Team USA teammate with Klay Thompson. He was He was talking to Klay before this happened, kind of talking to Klay about his own experience, leaving a situation where he felt unwanted, how things have gone for him in Dallas. And then, look, you can't discount the fact that they have a pre-prime top 3 player in the NBA, pre-prime perennial MVP candidate. While Luka's not out there recruiting guys, he doesn't have the relationships that go back years and years. I think that Klay deciding to come to Dallas certainly shoots holes in the perception that people don't want to play with Luka Doncic. And look, there are some guys out there who maybe want the ball in their hands. But for a guy like Klay, I think he looked at this situation and said, man, there's going to be a lot of open shots. This is a bona fide contender. There are the relationships with Nico, with Jason Kidd. The thing I would say about Nico is obviously, he's hired as a general manager. He's been an executive at Nike for years. And the number one things people talk about are the relationships that he has with agents, with players, et cetera, et cetera. I think you have to give Nico and the front office that he's put in place credit for the maneuvering that's required to be positioned to pull this off. It's not like they had cap space.
Yeah.
They had to be very creative and very precise with the moves that they made to be in a position to get a Klay Thompson and bring in Najee Marshall. Originally it was get Klay Thompson and try to keep Derrick Jones Jr. That didn't happen, but Najee Marshall, Derrick Jones Jr., not the same player, but similar, I would say, levels of player, similar role. But the Tim Hardaway Jr. trade to Detroit, where you're also getting back Quentin Grimes, that was under the radar, one of the better moves of the summer, I thought.
Yeah, to be able to move off the salary of Tim Hardaway Jr. to get a younger player in Quentin Grimes, who has had some issues with injuries in the past, but at the same time, there's tremendous upside with the ability that he has to shoot and hopefully defend for this team as they have a really deep team. Before we take our break here, the Mavericks are extremely deep. They brought in Spencer Dinwiddie as part of this team as well, a guy who was part of the Western Conference Finals run a couple of years ago. Are we looking, Tim, at one of the deepest teams in the league, even if it's just for the regular season? We know how rotations get shorter in the playoffs, but is this one of the deeper teams in the league this year for the Mavericks?
They certainly rank up there. And look, it's going to be a good problem to have in some situations. There's going to be guys who feel like they deserve minutes where there might not necessarily be a regular role. There's going to be competitive situations. We'll see as the season progresses and you get closer to the trade deadline. Is there another move or moves to be made there? But there's no doubt that this team has quality depth, as well as, you talk about the combination of quality depth and top end star power. There's not a whole lot of teams, maybe not another team, that has that combination.
Let's take a quick break here on the Gray Area Podcast. More with ESPN's Tim MacMahon. Luka Doncic is ready for a big year. Klay Thompson, Kyrie Irving ready to help him get back to the NBA Finals. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast. Let's hear from Mint Mobile. Today's video partner is Mint Mobile. Have you ever thought, why in the world is my wireless bill so high? What am I actually paying for? Speed, data, coverage, access to 5G, mobile hotspots, unlimited talk and text. What am I actually getting for all of this? Mint Mobile offers all these features for as low as $15 a month. And that's why I've partnered with Mint Mobile. They reimagined the wireless shopping experience and made it easy and online. No stores, no salespeople, just huge direct-to-you savings. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to premium wireless? Mint Mobile runs on the nation's largest 5G network. Go to mintmobile.com, also linked in my description, to get premium wireless for $15 a month. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to digital eSIM cards, which most phones now have, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your own home. If your phone doesn't have an eSIM, Mint will ship you a new SIM card for free. Big Wireless wants you to think that they're the only option. Don't be duped. Go to mintmobile.com/Kevin Gray, also linked in my description, to stop paying more than what you have to for your phone plan.
Hey there, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. Enticing, right?
Back here on the Gray Area Podcast. Appreciate you hanging out with us to our spot. And thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, and Aura, with ESPN's Tim MacMahon here on the Gray Area as we get you ready for yet another NBA season, and especially with the Dallas Mavericks. And Tim, before going to break, obviously we've talked about the additions of Klay Thompson and what that means for this team. Bringing in Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes, but all of this starts and ends, of course, with 77 and Luka Doncic. 5 straight years, first team All NBA selection, top 3 NBA MVP this year. But this year, coming into a season where he had went to the finals, the disappointment in losing in 5 games to Boston. What is your understanding about his approach to this offseason and what that loss has done for him to try and get his team back to that spot and obviously try to win the finals? What do you know about what he's been trying to do to get that mindset going into this upcoming year?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, he needed some time off. He needed some rest. And we saw how banged up he was throughout the playoffs, especially in the finals. It was a struggle for him in the Olympic qualifying tournament. I don't know that you would say blessing in disguise that Slovenia didn't make it. I'm not sure he would look at it that way, but he needed some time off, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he looks, going into training camp. Last year he really came in the best shape that he's been in a while, but that's going to be a constant kind of struggle and a way to measure his growth. Can he maintain that throughout the course of the season? When, look, as much as he has the ball in his hand, as many minutes as he plays, he's going to be banged up. He's going to deal with injuries. But this guy at this point, look, he's a top 3 player in the league, and there's still a lot left for him to accomplish. He has not gotten quite to the top of the mountain. From an individual perspective with an MVP, which I will happen, and from a team perspective with a championship, which the Mavericks have positioned themselves to at least give him that chance. I do think that the partnership with Kyrie has really paid dividends for Luka, and Luka's the face of the franchise. Because of that, naturally, he's going to have a large share of the leadership responsibilities. But I think he'll be the first one to tell you he kind of follows the lead of Kyrie, and Kyrie is the culture setter with this, within that locker room. And I think that's been a really good thing for Luka. I think it's eased a lot of the pressure on him. And I just think to have Kyrie to kind of just behind the scenes conversations, bounce things off of, I think it's been a great deal for Luka, which, for being real honest, if I'd have told you I thought that was going to happen when they made the trade with Brooklyn to get Kyrie, people would have thought I was insane. But that's the way things have played out.
It's funny you say that, because I think a lot of people felt the same way when the trade initially happened, that could this partnership work with 2 guys that need the ball in their hands quite a bit. But I think it just shows how really good they are, not only together, but the basketball IQs that both of them possess, that they have learned how to play off of one another. It kind of leads me to this real quick, because I want to touch on it, because you can't really talk about Luka and Kyrie without talking about the guy that's coaching the 2 of them and how he's been able to make this work. What have you made about Jason Kidd now, 2 out of the last 3 years, 2 of his first 3 years, I should say, getting into at least to the Western Conference Finals, of course, making the finals last year, and how he's been able to get this partnership to work and really get this team to buy in to what he's selling night in and night out?
Yeah, and for whatever reason, it seems like Jason Kidd, when things aren't going well, gets the majority of the blame, and when things do go well, doesn't get a whole lot of credit. And I think you have to give him credit for how well the Luka Kyrie partnership has worked, but because first and foremost, both of those guys have immense respect for him. They are willing to be coached by Jason Kidd. And look, I've written and talked a lot about just how toxic, I would even say, the relationship between Luka Doncic and Rick Carlisle quickly became and continued to deteriorate. And obviously, Kyrie's had his issues with coaches throughout his career, but those guys both respect J. Kidd. And it can be as simple as J. Kidd, last summer saying, hey, we've got to play faster. And when you heard that, what's the first thing you thought? You can play faster with Luka?
Right.
Like this dude wants to walk the ball up the floor, take his sweet time, bounce it 20 times and, put it in the hole or get it to a guy for an open look. But he wants to control everything. And when J Kidd goes to Luka with that, the first thing Luka said is, okay, we got to get the ball in faster. And J Kidd told me he was kind of braced for like having to sell him on it, but boom, okay. And so, it's that kind of buy-in. And again, that sounds like a small thing, but Luka's willingness to, and they went from 28th in pace to 7th in pace. Luka's willingness to buy into that really kind of just opens everything up for the maximizing Kyrie. Because how many times is it a look ahead pass from Luka to Kyrie, and next thing you know, it's a layup. So, suddenly you're not so worried about, well, his turn, my turn. No, things are happening within the flow. Kyrie's getting the ball in the open floor where he's one of the best players in the league. But again, that doesn't happen unless Luka's willing to listen to J Kidd, buy in, and immediately not even have to be convinced, but immediately go into the solutions phase.
For Luka, I want to ask you this, because what's the next level for him, if there is one, given what he has to not only just achieve from a basketball perspective in terms of winning a championship, because we know that's next for him in terms of the MVP championship, but to be able to be that complete player that I think a lot of folks who either question what kind of shape he comes in and year out, or whatever the case may be, what for you are you looking for him to be able to take even yet another level or step this upcoming year?
I mean, really, it's just, I think, continued maturation. And it's, we can talk about, the discipline, diet, conditioning, all that kind of stuff, which there certainly has been progress. And then honestly, what's his biggest weakness on the floor? It's the referees,
Yeah.
and it's understanding, which battles to pick and when to pick those battles. And again, I think there has been progress. There's a lot of progress to be made there. Defensively last year, I know he got hammered pretty good in the finals, but defensively he made major strides last year. That's got to be the standard for him. And really, it's about taking pride. Look, he's going to have some limitations, but are you going to take pride in it? Are you going to consistently compete? And look, the Mavericks are going to scheme to protect him as much as possible on that end of the floor. Do your job within that scheme, and he can be very good in that scheme. You're not going to post him up. He's a bull, right? And
right. Yeah.
The ISO numbers were very good last year. Now, that's with a lot of support behind him, but like when he's locked in as a help defender, he can be very good because obviously the guy's a basketball genius. He has good hands. He has quick hands. So again, I think for Luka, I mean, maybe the skill can continue. Maybe he can continue, becoming better and better, like as a 3-point shooter and those kind of things. But I think the vast majority of it for him is about kind of the psychological side of the game.
Yeah, essentially, you mentioned the 3-point shooting. Last year shot nearly 39% from three, and now the Mavericks have 2 of the 5 guys who led the NBA in 3-point makes last year, with Luka and obviously now the addition of Klay Thompson. And the supporting cast around Luka and Kyrie, we talked about the addition of Klay Thompson, but one player that I'm really intrigued to watch this year for the Mavericks is Derek Lively, going into his second year. Last year on opening night, outplayed Victor Wembanyama on opening night and really opened up the eyes of not just the Mavericks, but the NBA world about, hey, there's a lot of potential here. We saw him seesaw back and forth in terms of the starting lineup with him and Daniel Gafford. What are your expectations for Lively going into this year, knowing that it feels like he's going to be the starting center for this team, and what that means for the defensive upside for the Mavericks, both offensively and defensively, night in and night out?
I mean, the sky's the limit for Derek Lively II, and he knows he's in a perfect situation, and he's a perfect complement for Luka. When you talk about the long-term optimism for the Mavericks, it's those 2 guys that, obviously you start with Luka and then you get to Lively. For right now contending, Kyrie, Klay, those guys are a big part of that, but I'm talking about a potential, decade plus long window here that's going to go far beyond the Kyrie and Klay Thompson. And Lively, when the Mavericks drafted him, was not expected to be an instant impact player. I mean, the guy was a 5-5 guy at Duke. He was considered a raw project who projected to be this kind of perfect, springy, rim protecting, lob finishing, floor running complement for Luka Doncic. The fact that he was that ready that soon, it's a tribute to him and his work ethic. It's a tribute to Sean Sweeney, Tyson Chandler working with him behind the scenes. And the guy is, as Tyson told me last year, that the guy is a sponge. And I think he just scratched the surface last year. I mean, you talk about defensive potential. I've had people over there compare him to Joakim Noah. And obviously he's bigger than Noah and
Sure.
more athletic, but the point being, they don't think he's just a traditional kind of rim protecting type of big. They think he's a guy who you can do a whole lot of things with him schematically, that he can get out on the floor and defend. You go back to the Timberwolves series, nobody remembers this play because of the play that happened right after, when Luka spoke Slovenian after putting that step back in my guy Rudy Gobert's eye. But the play right before that, if you remember, Lively got switched onto Ant Edwards.
He did.
And Ant tried to get in his bag, and he couldn't get anything, and he ended up having to pass the ball and threw it out of bounds. That right there is a glimpse of Lively's defensive, I'm not even going to say potential, defensive ability. That goes way beyond what you expect out of a center.
Yeah, he's going to be a big part of this team. I know folks got excited when he drained the three-pointer in the NBA Finals against the Celtics. They go, oh, maybe that's something that's going to be a part of his game. But he's talked about this offseason dominating the paint in the interior, becoming that presence there, and then we'll see how that expands in terms of his offensive game outside of that once he masters that portion of the game, it sounds like.
Now, he wants to be a three-point shooter. There's no doubt about it. And look, he didn't look at that as some kind of a fluke thing. He works on the three every day.
He does, yes.
He works on the three every single day. Now, whether he and remember, like when they drafted him, you had Nico talking about his clutch pro day, the pro day his agency put on, where he shot the three well then.
Mm-hmm.
Derek Lively fully expects to be a three-point threat. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But I always say, that's a cherry on top of the sundae.
Yeah.
I mean, if he can become a three-point threat and be one of these modern bigs who can, shut down the paint on one end and open up the floor on the other, that's great. If he never makes another three-pointer in his career, he's still, a really nice piece of this Mavericks foundation.
I know if I was in, I would retire the three-pointer right there. I made one of the NBA Finals. We're good. I'm 1 for 1 for my entire career, and we'll just leave it at that when it comes to making one in the finals on the biggest stage. And it's funny you brought up the three-point shot because, one of the reasons why Klay Thompson is on this team is because their inability to shoot the three in the finals against the Celtics. Mm-hmm. Celtics presented a lot of matchup problems. They bombed away from the three-point line. We know what they did and how they were able to win that series. But, you got guys like PJ Washington. You've got other guys on this team who are looking to take that next step as well. Who's a player on this team that they are expecting to take that next step? Maybe it's PJ Washington, maybe it's someone else that they feel like if they can get that much more from him, it increases the ceiling of this Mavericks team this upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, I think PJ's probably the guy that you start with, and he obviously came in and was able to make an impact, and he helped them defensively, which I'll be honest with you, Nico saw that. I didn't when they traded for him. I'm like, this guy's on literally at the time the worst defense in NBA history, and the Hornets were worse defensively with him on the floor than when he was off it. But he bought into that, and the 3-pointer with he was a overall, honestly, not a good 3-point shooter, but a streaky 3-point shooter. And boy, he got hot at the right time for the Mavericks.
Yeah,
because the Thunder's game plan was dare PJ Washington to beat him.
and he did.
And he did. And he did. If he can elevate his 3-point percentage into the upper 30s, that's a huge difference maker. And it's not just about shots made, but it's about the way the teams guard him. It's about the way that the floor opens up. But man, offense is not going to be the Mavericks' problem.
Sure.
If Luka and Kyrie are healthy, I think this probably is a top 3 offense in the NBA, adding Klay to that mix. And it's going to be interesting to see, some of the things they do to incorporate Klay. I don't think you want him just spotting up on the weak side. You want a guy like that to feel like he's in rhythm. I'm pretty sure if he hadn't touched it a little bit, they'll find ways to run stuff for him, to get the ball in his hands, to get him looks. The question is, can this team be the type of defensive team that they were late last season, throughout the playoffs? If they are, I think they've got arguably as good a chance as anybody in the Western Conference. And, the thing about it is they don't have to be that good defensively to start the season. Just like last year, they've got to figure out that formula throughout the course of the season. And I do think there will be some challenges, because if we're being real honest, between Luka, Kyrie, and Klay, you're not asking any of those guys to guard the other team's best perimeter player. Yeah. So I think it's going to be PJ Washington's job early in the season, at least in that starting group. And I think that's asking an awful lot. This kind of dovetails into the Derek Lively II conversation. I think he's going to have to make up for a lot of limitations on the defensive end, as far as his teammates go.
Yeah, last year we said if this Mavericks team could just be average defensively, we know that they're going to score a ton of points. And during the second half of the year, they became arguably the best defense in the league, that led into what was, I believe, a 16-2 record to finish out the last 18 games of the year. The last couple of games are kind of punted on because
the last 18 that mattered.
Yeah, that mattered. And now going into this year, you remove Derrick Jones Jr. from the equation, you insert Klay Thompson. I do wonder, from Thompson's perspective, when he was at his peak, we're talking about one of the better two-way players in the game at that point. How much do you think he has left on that end of the floor to at least minimize the impact of what Derrick Jones Jr. was defensively, to make sure that isn't as big of a drop-off as it could be?
Yeah, and, I asked around to some of my scouting buddies, some of the executives that I talked to around the league, and I asked one guy, I said, is it fair to say that Klay at this point in his career, because you're right, he used to be one of the better two guards defensively in the league. I said, is it fair to say he's an average defender at this point? And I said, that might be a little bit kind. But he's motivated. He's going to compete. But again, we're talking about a guy well into his 30s who has come back from 2 of the toughest injuries that you can come back from. You just have to have reasonable expectations. And look, Kyrie, there were times in the playoffs you saw Kyrie is capable of being a hell of an on-ball defender. You can't.
That Clipper series comes to mind for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's just not reasonable to expect that out of him night in, night out throughout an 82-game season. Obviously you're not going to ask Luka to guard the other team's best players. So again, I think they're going to have to figure things out. I think they're going to have to, and Sean Sweeney and Jason Kidd have proven if they have decent pieces, they can figure this out. They've done it 2 of the 3 years. The 2 years, I think they kind of had a fighting chance. But they're going to have to figure some things out. I think scheme is going to have to mask some of the personnel deficiencies on that end of the floor. And really, if you look at their bench, their second unit, they do have a lot of good defenders in their second unit. You talk about Dante Exum, Quentin Grimes, Najee Marshall. I should have started with him. Maxi Kleba. Their best defensive players are all in the second unit right now, aside from Lively, and there's some assumption there on Lively. It'll be interesting to see how J. Kidd answers that question. I don't know if he's just going to anoint him the starter to open camp, but I do think that Lively is going to be the starter in a platoon with Gafford. And obviously Gafford's still going to be a big part of this.
Yeah. Last couple of things before I get you out here today, because you bridged me into something that's very interesting for this team, because we talked about the additions that they've made to this team, the prime that Luka Doncic is entering. They've got a young nucleus with him and Derek Lively going forward as well. But the window for this team seems to be very interesting given with Klay Thompson, his age, Kyrie Irving, 32 years of age as well. What kind of is the window that we're looking at here, and how quickly do the Mavericks need to maximize that given Luka's Supermax is coming at the end of this upcoming year? He's eligible for that. Kyrie Irving looking potentially for a new contract as well with this team. What window are we talking about here, and how quickly does this team need to maximize that given some of the financial commitments that they're going to start looking at down the road here?
I mean, look, when you have a chance like the Mavericks do because of the top end talent on this team, there's a sense of urgency because you don't know how long a window is going to be. I mean, in today's NBA, teams don't really look in terms of like 5-10 years. You plan for now, maybe the next few years, unless you're in a rebuilding type of situation, which obviously they're not. Having said all that, if Luka's here, if Lively's next to him, again, I think we could be looking at a decade-long run here where the Mavericks are right in the thick of things. Obviously, this is a city that has been through this before, had about a dozen-year run with Dirk where, they were pretty much contenders every single season. Finally, were able to break through there once. With a talent like Luka, there are legitimate title aspirations, or there better be.
Yes.
Every single season. And again, he hasn't hit his prime yet.
Yeah.
I mean, he's entering year 7, but he hadn't hit his prime yet.
And usually that's about the window where you start thinking about, all right, winning a championship and being in those conversations. It took Boston obviously a while to get there themselves, but they obviously broke through, last year. Last thing before I let you go here today, because, we've talked about how this team is where they are. Where do they fit in the Western Conference? I think the prohibitive favorite is the Oklahoma City Thunder with the additions of Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein there as well. Obviously, Denver with Nikola Jokic, although they've, a lot younger now, they've lost a couple pieces, especially with KCP. You've got the Timberwolves there. Where do the Mavericks fit in this hierarchy based off what they achieved last year and the expectations that they have going into this year?
I mean, they're on the short list of teams that I think have a legitimate chance to win the Western Conference. They just did it. It's not like we're, having to believe in something that we haven't seen. They've got a chance. They're a tier 1 Western Conference team. I think you mentioned the other teams there. Oklahoma City is the favorite. Having said that, Oklahoma City lost to the Mavericks in 6 games last year. Now, they added, those pieces they added those are high quality role players that seem to, at least on paper, fit awfully well there. But the Mavericks have every right to feel like the road to the Western Conference Championship still runs through Dallas because they won it last year, and I think there's a strong argument to be made that I was going to say they have the best player in the Western Conference. That becomes a Joker conversation pretty quickly.
Yeah,
too.
that Nikola Jokic fella comes in there as
but
well.
Hey, the probably MVP shirts and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think they absolutely feel like on any given night, Luke is the best player in the league.
Yeah, and I would agree in a lot of times with that. All right, Tim, and you'll cover the Mavericks all the time, but you also have your eye on the league as well. Give me a thing or two that's got your interest peak going into this upcoming year that has really got you going about, hey, man, I'm really looking forward to seeing this player, this team. We saw Philadelphia add, Paul George, to go along with Embiid and Maxey. LeBron, I think, is year 22 for him now playing with the Lakers. We saw J.J. Redick reveal his starting 5 going into this year. A lot of different storylines in this league. What's some of the ones that got you really curious this year?
And, listen, I don't think the San Antonio Spurs are a playoff team this year, but if you're not excited to see the continued ascent of Victor Wembanyama,
yeah,
you're probably picking the wrong sport. And they've gotten some competent veterans around him. They've figured some things out last year. Like, guess what? This 7'5" guy probably should be playing center.
yeah. And now you got the marriage of Chris Paul and Greg Popovich. I'm so fascinated by that particular marriage and how that's going. I think it's going to work well because of where they are in their careers. But at the same time, it's just interesting to see Chris Paul in a Spurs uniform of all things at this stage in his career.
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by Wemby and the Spurs. And another team that's part of my turf, the Memphis Grizzlies. Obviously, last year, a completely lost season. This stuff about people forgot about Ja Morant. Nobody's forgotten about Ja Morant. We all understand the kind of talent that he is. How ready is Zach Edey? How good is Zach Edey? If he's ready and if he's as good as they hope, then the Grizzlies very well could be a factor in terms of the fight to get out of the Western Conference this year.
It's going to be a deep Western Conference. The league in its entirety, so much talent, so many different storylines. Looking forward to watching it all unfold here in just the coming days and weeks. Tim, tell the folks so they can find you what you can look forward to in terms of your coverage of the league this year.
I'm at ESPN until they give me the boot, baby.
Tim does tremendous work, of course, on the Who Collective with Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps. In fact, my man is going on tour these days. Shout out to him and Wendy and Tim Bontemps out there in Akron, Ohio. I had a chance to sit down with Larry Nance Jr. Had a whole you still got your jacket? You still got your
Hey, I got a Letterman's jacket there. I got the OVO ESPN Finals jacket too. I'm the only person in the world who's got two because Wendy didn't want the Finals jacket.
Look at you stacking up the collectibles as you go on,
there
man.
You go.
I appreciate you hanging out with me on the Gray Area podcast, Tim. I really do, and I look forward to your coverage all season, man. Thank you.
All right, appreciate you. Adios, amigo.
That'll do it for this episode of the Gray Area podcast. Again, thanks to Tim MacMahon of ESPN for joining me here on the show. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And like and comment and subscribe to my channel here at Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Until next time, I'll talk to you later. Peace.